Welcome to Purpose Uprising. This is my deeply personal exploration about what it means to live on purpose. So I wanted to use this episode to share my story, to give some background and some context to kind of explain my obsession with this idea, this topic of purpose. I like to think of this podcast as being really about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because they're doing extraordinary things by doing the simplest thing in the world. And I think so many of us overcomplicate this notion of purpose. And the truth is, the people who do the most extraordinary things and who live the wildest, most fulfilling, satisfied, and wealthy lives do it by simply being themselves, by being the most authentic, grounded, anchored version of themselves. And there's a stat, it's pretty wild, that I think it's by the time you're 35 is conditioning. It's programmed. It's things that you've picked up from your environment. Only 5% is who you really are. And I was reading a book on the ethics and the philosophies behind yoga. And there was a really interesting line about an ashramic tradition. So the ashramic view is that life is made up of 4 distinct stages. So stage number 1 is when you're kind of helpless and you need to lean on others and your environment to learn, to survive. So when you're a kid and you're learning and you're taking in. Stage number 2 is when you go to work. You go and you create value for society, and you work hard, and you collect your experiences. Phase number 3 is you leave work, and this is typically like in your 30s. You leave work. So you spent your 20s, like a decade or so working. You leave and you come home and you do the inner work to synthesize wisdom. And you sit in contemplation, in quiet contemplation, and you synthesize what you took away from those 10 years of work. And then the 4th and final stage is you reintegrate into society with this new wisdom that you have to share with future generations and to really, truly add value. And I thought this was so interesting because right now, our view of working, when we think of the retirement age being 65, is it, in North America? We think of work as like this stage of our lives from 20 to 65. It's like we work for 45 years for what? To end up a 65-year-old ready to finally live life. Like we worked for our retirement. And so it's interesting because it's like it skips that 3rd stage of the ashramic life stages, right? You've got your development, you're learning, you go into work, and then you go straight into like being well, I was about to say wise old person, but in Western society, I think we don't really respect our elders the way that so many other cultures do. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity. But yeah, and this is like this 3rd stage of contemplation, of integration, of allowing all of your experiences to kind of letting the dust settle. I like to think of it as like a snow globe, like everything is floating around. It's a mess in there. And just taking a moment to let the little snowflakes fall to the ground so that you can actually integrate the lessons that serve you and leave the ones that don't. And this was a big realization for me when I left my corporate job about 1.5 years ago. And I very intentionally took 3 months off. And this was my version of letting the snow globe chill and letting the snow settle on the ground, because I had been moving and producing and hustling all for I don't know what, for almost 10 years. And I never really stopped to truly think, what do I want? Who am I here to be? I mean, I would meditate every day, but that was almost a strategy to just shut everything out for 10 or 20 minutes of the day, because otherwise it would just feel overwhelming. So even meditation was like this, what's the word when you go to physiotherapy and they're like, it wasn't preventative. It was like the damage was already done and I was looking for healing. I was looking for answers. I was looking for something to fix me ultimately. And when I realized that I'd been kind of on this hamster wheel in this like repetitive cycle, every 2 years, I would get bored of a job. I wouldn't be challenged. I would be bored, looking for the next step, wondering what it was going to be. Because it wasn't just like growth opportunities that I was after. It was, I wanted something that I was actually excited about. And every 2 years, I would hit this like plateau in a job, literally every 2 years. I was a marketing manager at a manufacturing company for 2 years. I was then a marketing manager at a global like $1 billion seafood company for 3 years. In between, I went to Ghana in West Africa to work a 3-month contract. That was incredible. After that marketing gig, I moved into a sales role for 2 years, selling social media analytics technology to marketers. So the pivot from marketing to sales kind of made sense, and burnt the shit out of myself like several times as a sales rep, because I am a perfectionist, type A, like workaholic personality at this point. I need to be the best at everything that I do. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind. We're going to start at the beginning. I was born, just kidding. We're not going to start at the beginning. I ended up working as a marketing and business development manager for a manufacturing company. So did that for 2 years. That was always meant to be temporary. Like I just needed something to get experience and to make good money. So at about 1.5 years in, I was like just so disengaged. Like it just wasn't for me. And I'm not someone that can just like turn it on. When I'm not engaged, if I'm not like passionate about it, literally drains my life force. It like sucks my life force dry. So I was struggling about 1.5 years in, thinking, okay, what do I want to do next? I don't want to continue doing this. And I couldn't shake this daydream, which was I wanted to go to Africa. And so here I am thinking to myself, what the fuck do I want? And I'm like toiling with this decision. And yet this daydream, I keep Googling marketing Africa. Like I just knew that I wanted to travel. And I didn't just want to travel for the sake of traveling. I wanted to go and work. I wanted to go and continue building out my experience. And so after many Google searches, I would think to myself, this is crazy. Like what? Of course I'm not going to do this. This is crazy. I wasn't even telling anyone that I was Googling this. And all of the books I was reading were like memoirs or like novels that were taking place in Africa. So one day I'm doing this Google search and I come across a really interesting opportunity that lights me up. And it's this marketing advisor 3-month contract in Ghana. And so I applied, didn't tell anyone that I applied, had an interview, had a second interview, and was given an offer. And I accepted it right away. So the nature of the position was my living expenses were covered, my travel expenses were covered. I wasn't making a wage other than like I would be effectively breaking even. Like they were paying me to come here, come there, and like I had a grocery stipend and all of that. And I didn't even hesitate. I was like, yes, yes. Like I could not have been more of a yes. And so then here I am telling my family, like, hey, so I'm moving to Ghana for 3 months. And everyone is just like, I was going to say a bit blindsided, but to be honest, I think they've come to accept or come to expect this kind of move from me. I've always been a dreamer, and it's funny because often I'm in resistance to the dreams until it just like reaches this boiling point and I'm like, I have to do something about this. And then the opportunity just shows up. At the time, I don't know how manifestation works. But, again, in hindsight, I'm like, girl, you manifested that job in Africa. So those 3 months spent in Ghana, I worked as a marketing advisor for local youth. So people under 30 who were entrepreneurs, who were either looking to start a business or were in the early stages of entrepreneurship. And so I was there to advise on their business plans, to help them put together their marketing strategies, and also to be a marketing advisor to the project that I was working with. And I was placed in Tamale in northern Ghana, a very arid place. It's interesting because in southern Ghana, the capital, Accra, which is by the ocean, is like lush and there's rainforests, and northern Ghana is kind of like the opposite. It almost feels like desert and it's really dry and really hot. And also predominantly Muslim, whereas the predominant religion in like southern Ghana is Christianity. So it was a really interesting contrast, like a cultural contrast in those two parts of Ghana. So I spent most of my time in northern Ghana, where women were extremely marginalized. And it was a shock to the system, especially as a woman who is very vivacious and like a self-starter, independent. I have had every opportunity in the world to create anything that I want or need for myself. And it was really difficult to be exposed to some pretty violent situations, not myself, but witnessing them. And so part of my mission while I was there was to really challenge and empower the women that I had the privilege of being like in their orbit. And, it's not like violence was prevalent and everywhere. It was like a couple of scenarios that were just such a shock to my system that were just kind of like, oh, well, this always happens, I absolutely loved my time there. I think that was the happiest and most aligned I've ever been in my life. I'm coming up to that same, like I've been feeling incredibly fulfilled and satisfied and feeling that same sense of awe and wonder and overflow in this year. But before this year, that was the happiest I've ever been. It was fucking hot. Could not wear makeup because it would sweat off as soon as you stepped out of your house. Like no sense in trying to do your hair. It's gonna be ruined within 30 seconds. Like even clothes, like I couldn't bare my shoulders because that would be kind of insulting and antagonizing to the culture. Had to wear like long skirts and pants and like, so all of the kind of surface level vanity practices that we get so used to were kind of stripped away. And it was like I was free because I didn't know anyone to just be myself. And the fact that I got to be of service and share my expertise, which, I had an MBA and a few years of experience, but it's not like I was massively advanced in my marketing skills. But what I had was extremely valuable to the people that needed it. And I wasn't making a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of things. Honestly, the biggest things that I would think about were like, was I going to have running water when I was getting home? Because there were many days where the water was cut and you had no idea when it was coming back. So like not even having a shower, like using a little soup ladle to like splash. So after that contract in Africa, I came home and I was like, I almost felt like I was right back where I started. I was like, okay, I'm not staying in Windsor. This is just, there's too much of the world for me to see. Ultimately, I chose to move to the East Coast, to St. John, New Brunswick. My best friend at the time lived there. And the job was right up my alley and offered like 50% travel, lots of international travel, which was really exciting to me. So I moved to St. John, New Brunswick, and I worked for 2 years there. And that is where I met my husband. We worked in different departments, but at the same company. And both of us just kind of got like cabin fever, little town fever. St. John is a very, very small town. Beautiful, but very small. And those smaller communities are actually quite difficult to make new connections and break into. They're very welcoming, but difficult to really kind of make lasting connections and put roots down. And so after 2 years there, classic, it was time to move on. And so that is when I moved to Halifax, which is where I'm based now. And I pivoted from marketing, so after 4 years in marketing, and got hired on as an account executive for the social media analytics company. And so moved to a new city and started a brand new job. Sales is something that so many people had told me, like, Jess, you would be such a natural at it. Like, the money's really good. You'd love it. And so there was already this expectation that I would be so good at it. And that was really difficult for me because I wasn't good at it at first. I had a lot to learn, but I fucking learned it, and I learned it fast. Within like the first 7 months, I started as like a complete newbie, like bombing discovery calls, to being the top performing AE within a year. And so that just goes to show like my desperation to prove that I am worthy and that I can be the best. And truly, it is a bit of an addiction and a bit of a problem. So I worked as an AE for 2 years and burnt out a ton because I had no way to self-regulate and always wanted to be a proper people leader, because although my resume had marketing manager on it, I wasn't managing people. I was managing agencies and managing strategy. And so I had this knowing that I'm here to guide people. I'm here to lead people. And so I made the necessary connections and presentations internally and was given an opportunity to step into a management role. And it was incredible. I went from being an account executive with no off button. Like I literally just couldn't turn off. I was managing my own pipeline, driving my own leads. And it was like my mind every single second of the day was thinking about how to convert. What did I need to do for this account? What do I need to do to hit 150% of my target on this month? And like, I was hitting massive targets, and I was like, okay, if I need to, I want to make this amount of money and have this amount of money in my retirement. I just did not have an off switch. And yet I was dying. Like, I knew that my nervous system was fried, and I couldn't turn it off. It was the weirdest thing. I'm sure some people listening can relate. And so I kind of convinced myself that once I end up in a management position and I'm not fully responsible for my own quota, that like I'll be able to chill a little bit. And to be honest, that was actually quite true. I think when I'm leading myself, I was really not being nice to myself. And yeah, it was wild how much easier it was to be nice to other people. Anyway, all to say, I moved into to a management role, and it was like night and day. It was all of a sudden I loved my job again. And I was like jumping out of bed, so excited. And I loved my team. I was managing a team of SDRs, and I loved my boss. And I was a part of building the strategy. And I came in and I was so keen and so eager to make everything better. And classic. I was excited, but I still didn't have that off switch. So I was available to my team at all times. I was like breaking sequences down and completely rebuilding them from the ground up and looking at metrics internally and like pitching brand new strategies, and they were being adopted. And I was training the team on how to sell to different personas. And I was like, there's so much opportunity. And I just fucking, instead of taking a bite, I just ravaged the whole fucking cake. And I had a lot of fun until about a year and a half in, and I started dying again. And I was doing so well on paper. My boss at the time kept telling me, Jess, you need to chill. Like, you need to actually work less. Like, take some time off and like, don't work on weekends. Like, no one else is working on weekends. I'm not asking you to do all this extra work. And I had this aha moment when we were having this conversation. It was an annual review in January 2022. And she told me, this job should be easy for you. She knew me really well because she was a manager of mine when I first started as an AE. And she was like, Jess, you're so smart. You're so driven. This job should be easy for you. And I was like, yeah, why am I making it so hard? Because deep down, I believed that I was only successful or worthy of success if I was working really, really hard. I did not believe that I was successful or even safe if something felt easy. Like, oh no, I'm falling off. I'm losing my momentum. If something is easy, I am doing something wrong. And it was in that moment that I started to piece together that I was the problem here. It was me making things so hard for myself and holding myself to an impossibly high standard and pushing myself. I did not need quotas or people to push me because I was my own drill sergeant. And so I took the hint and I started to think about ways to go easier at work and to find some joy and some play in my life. And this is when I really started to reconnect with my passion for painting and sketching and singing. And I started tapping into my inner artist and my creative side in my free time. But very quickly, that became a chore. And I started time blocking. And if I didn't feel like painting or sketching, I would force myself to paint or sketch. And then I was like painting so much and trying to elevate and taking these courses. And again, my boss was like, Jess, I think you're doing that thing again, or you're making something hard for yourself and you're not just enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it. She's very wise, this woman. As I kept seeing these patterns playing out. So here I am about 2 years in to my job as a senior manager on a sales development team. I was convinced that this was going to be the job where I was going to feel satisfied, where I was going to be of service, where I was going to like soar from there and become an expert in sales development and a well-respected leader and eventually a department head and blah, blah, blah. But 2 years in, the exact same heavy feeling that I don't want to do this anymore, I'm bored, settled in. And because I started building this self-awareness of, I think I'm making things harder for myself, I was like, oh, there's something here. I'm causing this block. I'm causing this cycle to play out over and over and over again. And so I resolved to myself, I'm not going to let this cycle play out again. I'm going to do something radically different. And so I decided this is not the job. It's me. I need to figure out, like, what do I need to fix here? Around this time, I booked a very extended trip to Europe. It was not common for people in the company that I worked with to go on a 3-week vacation, and I did. At this point, I had proven myself so hard that I know this is going to sound so big-headed, but like I had made myself irreplaceable. Like they would never fire me. They wouldn't fire me because I worked so hard and brought in so much revenue that like they couldn't. And somehow there was a twisted satisfaction that like I'm safe. Like my job is safe. I don't need to worry about that. So I booked this 3-week vacation, and my husband was with me, and we were in Europe for 3 weeks. And I came back from this trip, and I had my sketchbook with me the whole time, and it was incredible. We traveled through France and Italy. It was my first time in Italy. The food was incredible. The art was incredible. Just exploring new neighborhoods. And I came home just feeling truly refreshed and revived, and with this new zest for life, thinking, okay, like came back to Halifax and was all excited to go and explore new neighborhoods and go back to work. And I'm feeling like I'm finding all these reasons to be so grateful. And I'm like, I'm back, baby, I'm back. And during this trip, I'd actually started reading Julia Cameron's The Artist Way. So I started writing out my morning pages and booking solo dates for myself once a week. And things started to like crack in like beautiful ways. Things were opening up, and limiting beliefs were making themselves known. And my inner critic, I was starting to actually understand like what was my inner critic and what was actually me. And I had been through so much talk therapy at this point. So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, I need to figure out where do I want to go and how do I want this job to be of service to a higher vision. And I was having some conversations with people in my life. I've learned so much from having conversations. Honestly, conversation is like, it's like the soil that is just so full of nutrients that when you put a seed in, conversation is like the soil that allows the seed to sprout and to grow. I love conversations. You just learn so much, and there's such a beautiful energy exchange. And wouldn't you know that so many people throughout my life at this point would say to me, Jess, you should be a therapist. You should be a therapist. I'd be like, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'd love to help people. Keep in mind, when I was a kid in high school, all I wanted to do was make the world a better place. Yeah, I've definitely taken advantage of therapy. It has greatly impacted my life in a positive manner. So yeah, sure. But I would need to go back to school and blah, blah, blah. And it was like this weird thing. Like a stranger would meet me, we would have a conversation, and they'd be like, have you ever thought of being a therapist? I'd be like, whoa, like people keep saying this. And my initial response is like, yeah. It's not like definitely not. It's not like a fuck yeah. It's like a yeah. Yeah, like I could see myself doing that. Most of my one-to-ones with my team were always not work-related, because it was my firm belief that what was happening in their lives holistically was what they were bringing into their work. And so often my one-to-ones, yeah, we would talk about work, but we would often talk about like bigger mindset things and what's happening, and like, if you're not sleeping, what's impacting that? What boundaries can you put in place so that you're really happy and that you're really balanced? Because when SDRs are happy and balanced, they do a better job, like anyone, really. And so someone said to me, this was new. Someone said to me, Jess, you should be a coach. And immediately I had that same reaction I had when my mentor told me you should do an MBA. And I was like, whoa, yeah, I absolutely should be a coach. I had never considered this. I didn't know what a coach, even I knew that life coaches existed, but I had my own preconceptions about that. And here I was managing a team of SDRs. That was my favorite part of my job. Everything else was draining me. And I was like, yeah, I should be a coach. And so I looked up a coaching certification, found one that was happening literally 4 days from when I was looking this up. Online, a like weekend or 4-day intensive. I wrote up a memo and presented it to my director and said, hey, I'm putting forward this request for funding. I'll pay for half. You pay for half. Here's how it's going to benefit the team. Here's how it's going to benefit the department, and blah, blah. And it was approved. So I did this coaching certification days after this person said you should be a coach. So like I tell you, when I get that sacral response of like a fuck yes, I make it happen fast, because like otherwise it's just wasting time, right? So I do this coaching certification, and in the certification you have to take on 3 practice clients like right away to ultimately finish, like get your hours in and finish the certification. So I do this coaching cert, I get my 3 practice clients, and I'm meeting with them each like once a week for 6 weeks. And I'm doing this after work, and it's incredible. Like I'm energized by it. It's not draining me. And yet like I'm behind my laptop more. And I start like integrating some of what I'm learning and some of the frameworks that I was using into my one-to-ones with my SDRs. And it was great. Once my 3 practice clients were done, I didn't have the energy to go looking for paying clients. I kept thinking, I'm just going to use this to continue leveling up as a manager, and I'm going to take it with me, and it's going to be amazing. But I didn't really see myself as a coach. I would think to myself, yeah, eventually I would love to be an executive coach. Keyword eventually. I had this grand idea that 10 years from now, after I have all this experience and I've moved up from senior manager to director and maybe VP one day, then I'll become an executive coach. But I have so much more to learn. This is coming from someone who has been told she should be a therapist and she should be a coach already. So again, with the I am the one making things harder for myself. Because there was a limiting belief at the time that I haven't earned the right. I don't deserve success. I haven't earned it. I always need to be operating from a space of deficiency, that I need to be like clawing myself out of a hole. Otherwise it's not real success. Why did I have this idea? Stories from growing up. I had really hardworking parents. They were incredible. I had a great childhood. My younger sister and I, there's a 10-year gap between us and my older siblings. And so I was watching my older siblings work at a really young age. My dad was a restaurateur. One of the restaurants burned down when I was quite young. So watching like all of that frantic energy, and I was, around a bunch of really hard workers. And so I learned to believe the story that I made up to make sense of that was that success and money and a happy life is the result of working really, really hard. And like, that was the story that I carried with me. I have a really successful uncle who laughed at me once, and I'm a grown woman, okay? I'm just about finishing my MBA, and he's asking me, how's it going? And I'm like, yeah, it's been a trip, man. We've been working into the wee hours of the night. Like almost every day we have these big projects and we're consulting for this company and it's been incredible. But man, I'm excited for it to be over and for work to start because I feel like it'll be so much easier. And he laughed at me and he was like, you want to be successful? And I was like, yeah, I want to be successful. I want to make a lot of money. I want to wear Louboutins to work. And he was like, get ready to work 80 hours a week. And I took that as a reality check. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I had this story and it had been reinforced in so many times in my life that this needed to be hard. And so here I am again, 2 years in. I have this coaching certification. I've been nurturing my inner child and my inner artist and doing all of this inner work. And I'm like, okay, I think what I want to do is merge coaching with sales. So maybe I'll do sales enablement. So I started networking and having all these conversations, meeting with people like in New York at these big tech companies. And I would ask okay, your journey is so impressive. How do I, as a senior sales development manager who does a lot of enablement work, but who doesn't have sales enablement as a title on their resume, pivot into sales enablement? And every conversation, they'd be like, well, Jess, there've been a lot of tech layoffs and a lot of enablement people have been laid off. And so there's a whole workforce out there who has enablement on their resume who are applying for these roles. So it's probably not the best time to be applying. Best advice is continue building up your enablement skill set in your current role. Try to make a pitch to fund an enablement role. That's going to be your best bet. Stay at your company, build up your experience, and then you can pivot once you have the experience on your resume. So did all the things and applied to so many jobs, got rejected from everything, unsurprisingly. And then I had this one conversation with an old MBA friend of mine, Anish, just sending you so much love. And we had a great conversation. I reached out to him because he had been in sales and had pivoted to start his own consulting company. And I was like, Anish, that's so dope. I would love to be a consultant at some point. I'm thinking of consulting for sales dev teams. I think I've done so much as far as creating new strategies for this team. And I'd like to do it eventually. How did you do it? What do I need to be focused on? And he's like, Jess, you could literally do it right now. I was like, I don't know. I don't actually think that I could. I think I need more experience. He's like, why do you need more experience? And I was like, well, I don't think people would take me seriously. And I think I still have so much more to learn. He's like, you know what I think? I was like, what? He's like, I think you have imposter syndrome. I was like, oh, yeah. And he's like, I think you should talk to my friend Allie, who's an imposter syndrome coach. Have you ever worked with a coach before? I was like, no, but I've done a shit ton of therapy. And that was another fuck yes moment. I was like, how did I not think about this? I need to hire a coach. I want to be a coach. I need to be coached. And so that is what led me to hire my first coach. And I'm going to leave this as part one of a 2-part series. I hope that you can see the part of yourself in my journey. I think the big takeaway from part one is that we tend to make things harder for ourselves because of stories that we carry with us from our younger years. This is literally conditioning, right? Remember, at 35 years old, your personality is 95% programming from your environment. And so my question for you, so that you can reflect on this, is where are you making things harder for yourself? I look forward to sharing the rest of my journey. I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know if you did. Do me a favor. If you've been enjoying the Purpose Uprising podcast, please leave a review and make sure to subscribe to get notified of new episodes. Thank you for being here.